pretty much everybody in the room. So welcome to our three-part series on attracting and preparing teachers through innovation and choice. I'm Carrie Dank, and I'm the Executive Director of CEL. For those of you that don't know much about CEL, we're an outward-facing unit within the University of Indianapolis, and for the last 20 years, CEL's been engaged in promoting and supporting innovative solutions and challenges to problems across the education space. We work with K-12 schools, higher ed institutions, and external stakeholders, and I suspect that you or your institution at some point has benefited from our work either directly or indirectly. I invite you to learn more about CEL and our work by visiting cel at und.edu. And if you're following us, you're going to start hearing a lot more about our past projects as we count down to our 20th anniversary celebration this fall. We're planning the party now, and we'd love to have you celebrate right alongside us. If you've been involved in education for a long time, you'll know firsthand how complicated K-12 education has become. Once upon a time, school choice could be summed up by saying private school or public school. And today, the ways in which schools are organized, operated, governed, and authorized can be really confusing. There are private vouchered schools, charter schools, magnet schools, virtual schools, hybrid schools, innovation charter contract schools, in-district innovation schools, opportunity schools, the list goes on and on. And for teacher prep programs looking to partner with those K-12 schools, this can be a little overwhelming. All of these changes in the K-12 space have been occurring at a time at which fewer people are considering teaching as a profession, and when many colleges and universities are seeing a reduced interest in educator prep programming. It's easy to see these problems, but it's harder sometimes to find the opportunity. What we're aiming to do with these webinars is to help connect you to people, to programs, and to philanthropy that are looking at these changes and seeing a great deal of new opportunity. I doubt you'll walk away feeling like anyone is giving you all the solutions, but I do hope that our speakers will present information that piques your curiosity or sparks new creative thought that helps you in your work in preparing future educators. The series is sponsored by EdChoice, and they're a national foundation located right here in Indiana that's deeply interested in school choice. And at the end of the presentation, I'm going to ask somebody from that organization to talk a little bit about the resources they have within their foundation and how that could be helpful to your institution. I've asked John Kirkendall, who's the Dean of UND School of Education, to be our moderator today. Dr. Kirkendall is a thoughtful academic leader, and I appreciate his ability at being very practical when it comes to issues. So I'm going to turn the program now over to John.
Thank you, Carrie, and good afternoon to many of you. I was asked to talk a little bit about this, the teacher education profession and some of the challenges. And then I have the opportunity to introduce our keynote speaker for the afternoon, Dr. Kimberly Whitesmith. So let me do that first, and then I'll get into the introduction and we'll hear from Kimberly. Let's acknowledge first and foremost that teaching is a difficult profession. Those who seek becoming a teacher must go through a series of assessments and activities before they move on from the candidate phase to professionalism. When you think about teachers, you think about what goes on in the daily mindset of a teacher and what they have to endure and how best our preparation programs preparing them to do those things really well. Teachers first and foremost have to change the behaviors of students. A student comes into a classroom with a certain set of skill sets, limited, but once they finish that experience in a classroom over a series of weeks and months, years, their behaviors hopefully change. For instance, if you're a young child and you don't know how to count or you don't know how to read very well, or through that experience with a teacher, those behaviors change. And these are lifelong skills. Teachers do that. Many of the kids, or some of the kids, if you will, come to school willingly seeking that knowledge, and some of them don't. That's another challenge that teachers have to go through, is building that relationship with kids so that they are inspired to learn. And think about the time over 180 days, a teacher may have to spend that first month just building that relationship. So you lose 30 to 31 days just trying to inspire a child to learn and be proactive around their abilities and capabilities. Teachers often work in isolation. It's just them in the classroom. They have, departmental meetings and opportunities to engage with their teachers. In some places, co-teach, but for the most part, it's that teachers and those students on a daily basis. So the inspiration and the thought around what it takes to change that behavior comes from one individual. That makes the profession very difficult. And that's why teachers should be in high regard because of the many tasks that they're asked to do. And all of this has been enhanced during the COVID-19 pandemic. So when we think about teacher preparation and the challenges that programs are facing, teacher preparation programs have to continue to meet the state demands of producing new teachers each year. Almost every state in America is experiencing some type of teaching shortage. Often teacher preparation programs can be blamed for not producing more teachers from colleges and universities to meet that demand. This increases alternative efforts to produce teachers outside of schools of education or teacher prep programs. So those are challenges. Teacher prep programs can be scrutinized by accrediting bodies, legislators, K-12 communities, parents. We often, as leaders of prep programs, have the daunting task of responding to all of these key stakeholders just to have a fighting chance to keep our notoriety and respect, because the finger can always be pointed back to, or often is pointed back to, who prepared those teachers in these schools that are failing. We also face challenges around recruitment. Teacher prep programs and students alike who seek teacher preparation can do a cost-benefit analysis. When you think about a private school, such as the University of Indianapolis, where I serve, if the tuition is X amount of dollars, and the student looks at the amount of money that they will make as a first-year teacher, oftentimes they can be dissuaded from the profession, basically from an earnings perspective. So it's not attractive from a salary standpoint, and we hear this often. And you may say, well, teachers make pretty good money when they start out compared to other professions, but long-term, those increases don't happen, and students look at that. So they often seek majors that yield higher incomes. We also face challenges, particularly recruiting students of color into the School of Education, which I'm particularly excited about the conversation today that I know Dr. White-Smith will present, because she works at a very diverse School of Education. Teacher education programs also need to face the facts that they need to reinvent themselves. Are our teacher preparation programs staying the same with the traditional formats of curriculum? How do we move forward to become more progressive schools of education? We have to embrace the change. When we instruct and have our students understand that students learn best when the teacher is a facilitator, when the teacher is using a variety of learning methods, when the teacher is using assessments, not based on individual progress, but more around the students' holistic learning approaches, we receive better outcomes. And then finally, of the 5 pressures that I've discussed, one major one in terms of looking at higher education and schools of education that are on campuses, they're often met with this challenge of increasing enrollments with limited resources. That hasn't been the case for me at the University of Indianapolis. We have a great program, and I feel strongly that our administration supports the School of Education and wants to do everything possible to make our program strong. And I appreciate the efforts of SAIL working with us to enhance what we're already doing well. And so when you are challenged with increasing enrollments and looking at the prospects of new students coming in, how do you meet those demands? How do you become creative to do things well? And I hope to hear more about those topics today. So the question remains, are teacher preparation programs really slow to change? When we know that there are certain things that teacher prep programs, what they can do, will work and be successful. So we need to start thinking about moving from traditional preparation programs to progressive programs. How does that happen? And with that, I'd like to introduce my great colleague in the field of deanship and teacher preparation programs, Kimberly White-Smith. She's a great friend and a great thought partner, and she knows exactly what it takes to develop high quality progressive teacher education programs. Kimberly and I met through AACTE, which is the Association for Colleges of Teacher Education, where we both proactively serve on major committees. She's someone I can call on to share my thoughts, frustrations, and celebrations, and I can receive genuine feedback. Today, we'll have the opportunity to hear from her and how teacher education programs can take the next step forward, ultimately to prepare our college pre-service teachers, we call them candidates, to be overly prepared to teach in our K-12 settings. She's a professor and dean of the Lefitra College of Education at the University of LaFern, which houses more than 10 million in grants and donor monies to create innovative programming, unique district partnerships, and scholarships for students. LaFern is a Hispanic serving institution, serving approximately 50% Latinx students and about 60% first generation. With more than 25 years of experience in urban education and teacher development, Dr. White-Smith is an intellectual force behind the endeavors that foster academic justice for minoritized students through enhanced educational environments, organizational structures, policies, and teacher practices. She's co-authored many books around diversity, inclusivity, and leadership. In her current book, Through the Fire, From Intake to Credential, teacher candidates share their experiences through narrative, is an exciting piece that explores how teacher educators can better prepare against the backdrop of historical schooling inequities. Dr. White is a national thought leader. She is the vice president of the California Council on Teacher Education, a member of the board of directors for the American Association of College of Teacher Education, and WestEd, a powerful nonprofit research lab that generates over 160 million to study and transform education in the United States. Dr. White-Smith earned her doctorate from the Rasier School of Education at the University of Southern California and her undergraduate degree from the University of California, Berkeley. Dr. White-Smith, thank you for joining us.
Thank you so much. And hello, colleagues. I'm so glad for this opportunity to engage in this conversation, this very important conversation. It's also a topic that's very near and dear to my heart. Now, I'll tell you a little bit about that. But first, I want to acknowledge that I'm coming to you from the University of LaFern, which resides on Tongva lands, and we are guests here. And as we learn together this hour and a half virtually, we also recognize that collectively we may be guests on other Indigenous lands. And I invite you right now, colleagues, to put in the chat the Indigenous lands in which you inhabit. May we all strive daily through our work to honor and respect the ancestors, elders, and Indigenous people connected to these lands. My talk today is called Innovative Teacher Preparation in the Time of Choice, right? A little play on words, right? One of my favorite books, Love in the Time of Cholera. And I want to begin by being very transparent about how I approach this work, what my history has been, and why I'm very much invested in learning about different modalities, different types of schools, and why it's so important for me as a dean and to connect with my colleagues in my college around this conversation. So I was born into the foster care system. I was cared for by a beautiful elderly Black couple who were amazing. They were not rich people. My dad was a baggage handler at Greyhound bus, and my mom was a soul food chef. So I had really yummy and wonderful food growing up. And when I was about 4 or 5, we also took in my foster brother. And my foster brother did not speak at the time. His name was Prince, is Prince. And the social worker told my mother that Prince was uneducable. So if you can imagine looking at this beautiful little brown face and saying to that person that you are unable to be educated by the system, and then relegated to a special education program where you could not access the academic programming, but only self-care skills and life skills. My parents did not buy into that. They refused to allow Prince to be labeled, and they refused to allow me to see that this is what society does to our kids. So they pulled together the pennies that they had, and they took us out of the public school and they put us in private school. They put us in Catholic education, which is also another educational option for our students. And there we received support, care, love, and access to the academic educational environments that the nuns and the priests at the time when I was educated there was able to give us. And so for me, understanding that there are options and that there are ways to engage with our students without sidelining them is really important. I did my teacher preparation at Teachers College, Columbia University, and I'm very proud of that. Through my experiences there over 20 years ago, I was able to do my student teaching at Central Park East. And so some of you may be familiar with that, but it really opened my eyes to the idea that education doesn't have to be 35 kids in a classroom sitting at desks all day with me at the front of the room talking to them. There can be engagement. There can be motion around the room. There could be experiential projects as well as seat work, right? And so this idea for me of searching for new and innovative ways to educate all of our kids was really critical and important. As a teacher, and some of you probably have experienced this too, going into the classrooms, you might have, principals who say, oh, Kimberly can handle our most problematic kids, right? And then they'll start funneling kids to you that the other teachers are unwilling to take. My perspective is that as a field of education, we need to shift away from deficit perspectives of communities, in particular communities of color, and start embracing an asset-based approach to our communities. And we'll get a little bit into that as we go through our talk. I'm going to share my screen with you because I know how to. Awesome. So the twin pandemics of COVID-19, and that paired with the violence and anti-Blackness that we have endured over the last year, but actually for many of our communities of color for many years, it continues to exacerbate the already documented inequitable distribution of instructional supports, resources, technology, and cultural capital along race, gender, and socioeconomic lines. However, the most startling denial of educational resources endured by children from marginalized communities is access to licensed, experienced teachers and administrators who are committed to the communities we serve and who reflect the ethnic and linguistic diversity of urban and rural populations. The Lefebvre College of Education, where I'm dean at the University of La Verne, We're trying to do our part to answer the call to demonstrate how an agenda centered on social and academic justice and teacher preparation can be used to disrupt the current system of education and spearhead long-term systemic change. In 2016, the university received a naming gift for the Education College. The donation did more than change the name of a building. It was actually an investment and the impetus for newly hired dean, being me, to lead the students, faculty, and staff in a strategic planning process to re-envision traditional educator preparation and develop a shared understanding of what it means to be a Hispanic serving institution and not just a Hispanic enrolling institution, to borrow the term from my colleague, Gina Garcia at Penn. This process shifted the culture of the entire organization, influencing the structure, policies, and practices in order to eradicate the barriers that hindered our students' success. John shared with you that we are a very diverse university and college of education. And this is important to note that in 2018, according to the US Department of Education, National Center for Education, about 90% of our Latinx teachers were produced by Hispanic serving institutions. And about 50% of our Black teachers are produced by HBCUs. And so in thinking about diversifying the workforce, it's really important and critical for us to think about partnerships across our institutions to break down those silos and to engage in real critical conversations about the process. So our college focuses on 4 particular critical areas: developing highly skilled, profession-ready teachers through intentional exposure of teacher candidates to a variety of traditional and innovative school options. Diversifying the education workforce through close community and district partnerships. Promoting trauma-informed education centered on healing and not mislabeling students of color. Cultivating mindfulness for advancing conscious social change, empathy, anti-racist practices, and well-being in schools. I want to start off by talking a little bit about what we were able to do with some of our donor investment. We created a Center for Neurodiversity, Learning, and Wellness. It's a holistic learning clinic that allows students enrolled across all of our departments in the Lefebvre College of Education to be trained to provide interdisciplinary support and services to our local communities in the form of tutoring, mentorship, counseling, trauma-informed practices, anti-racist reflective practices, and psychological testing services. Through our multifaceted program of educational services, it has been a catalyst for our college-wide paradigm shift towards inclusive pedagogy and highlighting the genius of neurodiverse learners. So going back to that idea that our students are not a deficit, that our students are indeed an asset. When we look at higher ed overall and the numbers that we are receiving into our universities, the 2 populations that are growing, right? We know about the cliff that we'll be heading into in higher education, right? Where we will receive that drop off in students. But the 2 demographics of student populations that are growing are the Latinx population and the adult learner population. And so what we do to help our PK-12 partners in really engaging, right, and pulling this paradigm into play where we start to serve all of our students at the highest level will really help us in higher ed later on as we begin to receive these students into our halls. When we look again at the higher education landscape, and I think that this is something that as colleges and schools of education, we can help our universities and the field of higher ed better understand, is that more and more students are coming in with trauma, right, from their own experiences. 11% of undergraduates self-report having a learning disability. 200,000 students entering college right now as freshmen identify with learning challenges. About 11% have anxiety or anxiety disorders. 10 to 15% experience dyslexia. 2 to 8% ADHD. And 7 to 9% depression. And so when we look, and that's pre-COVID. So when we look at the landscape for ourselves in higher ed and for our colleges of education, it's really important that we clearly develop pipelines and partnerships that help us all better support our students. So one of the things that we've tried to do was be intentional with regards to our school partnerships, be innovative, and engage our school partners and our students in multiple ways. And this is how we better prepare them to work in different arenas. So our pre-service credential candidate courses invite teachers who are teaching in a variety of settings, whether it's public, private, charter, virtual, and in all formats, hybrid, online, in-person, dual language, to come to speak to our candidates on panels and for question and answer. We do this at the beginning because it gives our students opportunities to see that the educational process and schooling is not monolithic. There are multiple options. There are multiple ways to engage in learning. We provide open workshops with district university partnerships, highlighting the ways in which digital tools can be used to support students' socio-emotional and academic learning. We model the use of innovative tools like Flipgrid, Padlet, Jamboard, Nearpod for engaging online instruction. We emphasize the importance of flexibility in working with candidates to support students in a variety of situations with attention to include IEP goals and considerations for English language and neurodiverse learners. You know, a lot of my colleagues, they're like, neurodiverse learners. We're all neurodiverse. So what is it that you're trying to get at? And I think the terminology in neuroscience is neurodivergent learners. And those are students that have traditionally been pulled out and segregated in the special education system. So students with autism, dyslexia, ADHD, emotional disturbances, and other special needs. Students with mental and behavioral health issues that require socio-emotional supports. We hear a lot in the field of teacher education, right? We want our students to have teacher education experiences in the best classrooms, right? Where they experience what good and quality education looks like. And so by doing that, a lot of times we are not exposing our students and our student teachers and our field work to experiences that might help them rethink their toolbox for engaging with our students. We shield them from the realities of what our classes look like currently. I know that my first job in the field, and I'm from South Los Angeles, when I came back, working in the field, working in my classroom, I was definitely at a disadvantage for not having the experience to work with all of the students with the variety of different experiences and challenges that they have. It was something that I learned quickly, but I think that as colleges and as educators, we have, the onus is on us to prepare our students for every environment that they might face, and to help them understand that all students, deserve access to academic learning opportunities at the highest level. So some of our intentional community-based partners, we have partnerships with over 220 local school districts in areas such as Pomona, San Bernardino, and Bakersfield, which is Kern County. My College of Education, we have a main campus, but we also serve students in rural areas as well through our satellite campuses. And so that's a unique feature of our College of Education. And it allows us to really provide a variety of experiences for our students. So some of our professional development school partners, excuse me, and you'll see that we've chosen them for very distinct reasons and purposes. So Solario, excuse me, I'm gonna drink of water. Solario Elementary School is in our Etowanda School District. It's located in Fontana. And we chose it because it's a high needs area. And it have an emphasis on academic and social justice. Foothill Knolls STEM Academy in Upland Unified School District focuses on neurodiversity. Laverne Science and Technology School in Pomona Unified School District, also located in a very high needs area. San Jose Charter School has a focus on social emotional learning and is also located in a high needs area. Some of our newest strategic partners that we've engaged with, which I think is very unique, is California Connections Academy, which is a completely virtual school. And getting our students ready for the virtual environment during COVID was not as difficult a transition as it would have been if we had not already started preparing and had school partners that actually utilized and leveraged this format. Renaissance School for the Arts and Sciences, which is a private school located in Los Angeles County, and it has a focus also on neurodiversity and looking at neurodiverse students and recognizing their strengths and their genius and helping to bring that out and then to engage them in the process of moving on to college. Epic de Cesar Chavez High School, which is located in Kern County, is actually a high school focused on adult learners. Epic is a high school that was developed by the Field Workers Institute of Education and Leadership Development, an organization founded by Cesar Chavez. The students in this high school work in the local fields there in the rural community in Kern County, and then attend high school classes in the evening. Right now it's virtual because of COVID. And so again, this is an opportunity for our students who are getting their licensure in K-12 to engage with a different type of learner, right? The adult learner population, again, one of the demographics in higher ed that is growing and something that we should pay attention to as colleges and schools of education. So the work that we're doing and attending to, right, provides us with strategic opportunities that come just from doing the right thing. Some of those strategic opportunities have been, for instance, a partnership with San Bernardino City Unified School District, who signed a multi-year professional development contract with us through our Neurodiversity Center to offer non-degree professional certificates in neurodiversity and inclusion for a cohort of 35 district-wide teacher leaders, increasing to 70 in the next school year. Pomona Unified is working with us in collaboration with Branch Alliance for Educator Diversity. We're beginning a multi-year process in our teacher education programs to diversify the profession and better serve our Black and Latinx populations. We're creating a teacher training program that produces classroom-ready BIPOC teachers and continuously improves teacher education structures, policies, and practice in the service of improving student outcomes. And then Pomona Unified and West Covina Unified are partners in our CNLW's Dyslexia Teacher Training Program. Both districts are committed to establishing district satellite training sites within 3 years. So unique opportunities or unique challenges to California. California did not recognize dyslexia until a legislation was passed in 2018. So that meant generations of students with dyslexia either were compelled or forced into a label that did not fit what their actual learning challenge was, or they just did not receive any services and was left to flounder on their own. So for us, this was a strategic initiative and a challenge and an opportunity, right, to do well by doing good. By partnering with Fairleigh Dickinson University and creating a dyslexia certificate that we then are sharing with our district partners at this time. So these are some of the strategic initiatives that we've been able to work through because of our attention to academic justice and equity. We also provide workshops and professional development opportunities for our in-service teachers, parents, students, and the communities that we serve. So online literacy tutoring, this is something that we used to do in person pre-COVID, and COVID has given us many gifts during this time, and one of them was compelling us to see how we can serve more people using the technology at our disposal. So this allows us and our teacher candidates to serve students across all of the regions that we serve. We're in the high desert, we're in South County, we're in, like I said, Kern County. So we span many miles across the state. We provide dyslexia-specific tutoring for our local children also through our dyslexia teacher training partnerships. And I said, again, at our district partner sites. We have focused workshops. RICA Prep, for those of you who are coming from California, know that RICA is the bane of our existence and is not aligned with what we know to be best practices in literacy training, but it's a hurdle and an obstacle that our students have to face. And we know that standardized tests disproportionately impact our teacher candidates of color. So we also offer CBEST and CSET prep. Something else unique that we offer to our students and our community partners is something we call the Dyslexia Experience. Because dyslexia is something in the state of California that we have not had to recognize, it's really important for educators and for parents to understand what it is and how it impacts our students. And so we provide a simulation currently online to raise awareness and promote better and deeper understanding of what dyslexia is, since we have not attended to that in a really long time, if ever. We also, in partnering with our district partners, we also saw a need to help high school students who do experience learning challenges, how to better advocate for themselves to transition to college. We lose many students from high school into our community colleges and our four-year colleges simply because they don't know how to advocate for themselves and know that there are strategies and supports for them to help them be successful once they reach us. So the Genius Project offers a summer program for incoming freshmen and for rising high school seniors who have documented learning differences. And the purpose of this 4-day, 3-night residential program is to help them build a sense of personal empowerment and essential skills for thriving in college while eliminating the stigma associated with having autism, dyslexia, ADHD, or other diagnoses. So that's something that also was born out of this work. We also offer socio-emotional wellness for our families, right? Due to the high stress that are associated with the current twin pandemics. We've developed a parent mindfulness curriculum, and neurobiology and neuroscience has helped us really see how stress impacts learning and growing and developing. We know now through the research done by Kaiser Permanente on the ACEs test, so the adverse childhood experiences, we know that students who experience 3 or more ACE challenges definitely are impacted. Their learning is impacted. They put up this, fight, flight, or freeze affect in classes. And so it's really incumbent upon us as educators to really think through that and to learn the strategies and the techniques to kind of lower that affective filter in order to reach them. Something else that our research is finding, we want to dole out trauma as the new label, right? So instead of giving our students the label of socio-emotional disorder or ED, we say, you got trauma, you got trauma, you got trauma. And we use that as an excuse to provide, again, sheltered educational experiences and lack of academic access to our students. We really started looking again at our teachers, our educators, and especially in thinking through anti-bias, anti-Black training that happens in schools and in our own colleges and universities, right? And what we've noted through our research is that educators and people who are in service industries, they enter into that line of work because they have experienced some form of trauma themselves. And they are, in essence, working through their trauma by trying to work with populations and prevent that same trauma or prevent those students from experiencing the things that they might have experienced. So if you can imagine, we have educators and teachers in the classroom who have trauma that they have not themselves attended to, working with students who also have experienced trauma. And you can imagine that this lens prevents us from really doing the self-dive and the work necessary to remove any biases or any lens that we have that might color or discolor the students that we serve and that we work with. We already know from our research on the school to prison pipeline that African American students are disproportionately funneled into special education programs at 3 times all of the other ethnic groups combined. And so this is something that we really need to attend to and work on. So these are the districts that we work with and provide social emotional supports for our families and the groups that we work with. Some of the things that, points that I want to kind of leave you with, or things that I'd like for us to think about as leaders, as educators, in higher ed, and especially in colleges and schools of education, what is the responsibility that we have to really push our institutions to think through universal design for learning in higher education spaces? It's something that we don't pay attention to, that we don't think about. But just like we need our candidates to be exposed to different types of schools and schooling practices, whether they're the open model, where you have students walking around and engaging in learning, whether it is virtual, completely online learning, whether it is hybrid, where you have some face-to-face and some virtual learning, whether it is magnet schools, charter schools, all of the different schools, that types of schools that Carrie talked about earlier in his opening. When we think about the PK-12 landscape, and we understand that in order for learning to happen, that we have to be engaged in multiple ways, right? There's no one way or best way to engage our students, and in one silver bullet to teach all of our students. So why then do we do that in higher education? So we give them choice in the PK-12 landscape, but we don't provide them choice in higher education. And so that's just the big question for me that I love talking to my colleagues and engaging with. So anyway, thank you so much for this opportunity to talk about the work that we do. I'm very excited. For anyone who is interested in connecting with me and learning more, these are all the various ways that you can reach me or connect with me or DM me. So thank you, John.
Thank you so much, Kimberly, for that thoughtful presentation. I knew you would do this. So, and we're glad to have you continue with the conversation. We'd like for this to be a dialogue with our participants on the panel in our discussion today. And so if you would like to put your questions in the chat, you may do so, or you're able to raise your hand through the Zoom feature. We will acknowledge you to ask your questions in that particular format. I see questions coming in now. What I'd like to do is maybe kick the ball off a little bit with you, Kim, and just go back to your conversation around strategic partnerships. And you mentioned the virtual school and the adult learning school. How did your students receive that opportunity to work in those types of settings? Because that, again, goes back to progressive types of teacher education programming. How did your students receive that?
Mm-hmm. So it depends on the type of educational experiences our students have had themselves, right? We tend to want to engage in education in the way that we engaged, right? I think the reason that, you know, I am so on fire about innovation and thinking about different modalities for students is because, you know, in my growing up, that's what my mother expressed, you know, to us, and taking us out of our constrained environment and putting us in different learning environments. So one, it depends on the framework that the student is bringing with regards to what they feel education should look like and be. The other piece is the work that we do at the very beginning to upload for our students, ideas around moving from deficit perspectives of students and understanding that there is only differences, right? There is not a student who is uneducable in the way that the social worker framed my brother, that there's no student that exists. And so helping them really kind of engage in the dispositions that we hold for our college. So that was one of the pieces of work that we did up front as a College of Education. We really went through and said, what are the dispositions that we want our teacher candidates to really engage with, right? Cultural agility is one of them, right? Flexibility and being able to teach in multiple environments is another. So coming in, we already let them know, if you're coming to the Lefebvre College of Education, you're going to be engaged in multiple modalities and learning how to teach. You're going to be exposed to different types of environments, right? And so really, it's an adjustment for some of our students who are raised in environments where you sit at the desk, you fill out your worksheets, you have the teacher at the front of the desk with their back turned, writing on the board, especially in our middle and high school teacher candidates, right? They are very much used to a very didactic modality of learning. But when you are working with adults who are in their 20s, 30s, 40s, 50s, who have worked all day doing hard labor, and they are coming to you at 7 p.m., 8 p.m. at night because they are trusting you to be that bridge to the knowledge that they need in order to transform their life, there is a heavy burden, there is a huge responsibility to respond to that. And I think that over time, our students, they really absorb that responsibility. They really kind of are able to get in touch with the desire of learning and really engage in deeper and more meaningful ways.
Thank you for that. That drives me to my next question around diversity. So you have a very diverse population. You live in California, yes. All right? Your institution is very diverse. Your College of Education is diverse. How do you, with the impetus that we're always pushing for more diverse learners, and you talked about that really well in your presentation, that having that connection between a student of color with a teacher of color. Indiana's not very diverse, okay? Mm-hmm. And so we're often asked to meet those same challenges in a state that doesn't produce that type of diversity. So what suggestions would you have for a state like Indiana, who's not as diverse as California, obviously? How do we increase that pipeline of diverse students that can go out and become teachers and work in diverse settings?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, as we know, I think as of 2018, 80% of the teachers across the country are white. And so this is definitely an issue that the whole field needs to attend to. So my feedback, my input on this issue, and you know, you and I work at the national level with AACTE to address this particular issue. One of the most successful ways to really kind of figure out, well, there's a couple of things. There is how do we address the image of teaching, right? Overall in the media and in our communities, right? How do we engage and excite communities, in particular our communities of color, to want to become educators? How do we inspire them into the profession? So there is a level above this that we all should be committed to and engaging in the work of really elevating the profession overall, right? And so first there's that layer. Second is even in our most remote areas that lack diversity as a state or as areas, there are pockets of diverse communities, right? Of marginalized communities. Mm-hmm. And so that might be socioeconomic, that might be ethnic and linguistic. And so the work then becomes, how do we engage in partnerships with the district that serve those students? And how do we help them create pipelines of excellence into our institutions of higher ed and into teaching? How can we, as four-year institutions, build better bridges? The majority of marginalized community members, their experience in higher ed happens at the community college level, at the junior college level. So how can we better partner with our community colleges to provide them access into our teacher education programs to create more diverse teacher education candidates? And then also too, how do we partner with our school districts? Once upon a time, many years ago, I worked with a program called the Delta Development Center. And I worked with one of our California State universities, and we actually went out to the school districts and we held teacher prep programs there in the community so that the students did not have to drive out of their communities to the ivory towers to, you know, a situation where they might feel uncomfortable. You know, I mean, we've experienced that before. We've talked about imposter syndrome when we walk on that, you know, college or university campus and you look around and you're like, "Ooh, do I belong here?" And so creating safe spaces in their communities where they can do teacher prep programs and then pipeline into the communities that they live in have been really successful opportunities.
Great, thank you. I'll move over to the chat. We've got a couple of questions. Yes, one question that I thought of, and this is from my good colleague, Rachel Amingatah. Beyond your initial gift, you know, you talked about the Fetra family and their donation. How do you sustain these great activities and programs that you're doing?
So let me let you all in on a little secret. When you get an endowed gift, you're all excited at the beginning and you're like, wow, this is amazing. We get $10 million. And then reality sets in and you figure out you don't really get $10 million, right? Depending on whether that this is a cash gift or it's a trust that you know, which is just a promise of money until the donor, you know, passes on and then the family reverts that to you. Sometimes it is a cash gift, but the university has to vest the money for 2 to 3 years before there is any roll off or a percentage of that comes back to you to spend. So you don't really get $10 million to do something with. So when I got word of the donation and then found out that I really didn't have any money to work with, I was like, okay, how can I make lemonade out of this? And so really just using the idea that somebody cared enough about education to invest in us was enough to get faculty excited about daydreaming about the different things that they could do, right? So if we could really just dream about the ways that we can engage and transform education and educational practices, what would we do, right? So the Center for Neurodiversity, Learning and Wellness was born of this brainstorm, right? And without any money, what I was able to do as the dean was to prioritize the work of CNLW in my budget, right? So skimming stuff off of other things in order to kind of support, you know, the stipends and the course releases required for them to really carve out that work. Once that work was carved out and we started collecting data and we started to get a sense of what it was that we were doing, we started integrating the learning from that into the rest of the college. So our general education program and our special education program, we ended up integrating those two programs. So now people can come to us and get a SPED credential and a general ed credential in the same program. That created a cost savings to us that we were able to then reinvest into our programming. So that's one way. The second way is we soon found out that people wanted the learning that we were receiving as a result of the good work that we're doing. So they wanted to have mindfulness workshops with all of their principals. Their principals were burning out. Their principals were wanting to leave schooling. And so we then began to develop certificate programs aside from our programs that we were able to then package to the school districts. That gave us a revenue stream, again, that we were able to reinvest back into our programs. The work of CNLW now is self-sustaining even without the endowment. Because of the work that we're doing, and it's growing. The dyslexia certificate, once that is really up and running, that will also provide us with revenue and resources as well. So, doing well by doing good is part of my motto. And so being entrepreneurial, as an educator and as a dean, we shy away from that. We think that's a dirty word to say, but it really is. I consider it an investment in ourselves and in our communities.
I couldn't agree with you more. Thank you for that. So let's talk a little bit about charter school, public school, private school, right? Where do we send our kids, right? Where should our teachers work? There's a lot of debate around this. Lawmakers spend a lot of time dealing with it. Ed prep programs spend a lot of time trying to figure out who to partner with more strategically. What is it that you think public school teachers could or should learn from private school teachers? That's one part of the question. And the other part is, how strategic should schools of education be around partnering with different types of school modalities?
Mm-hmm. So for us, I think that the pandemic really kind of compelled us to diversify the types of schools that we use in partnership and for field work and for student teaching. Because during the pandemic, a lot of schools didn't want our student teachers. They did not want folks to come and do field work. There was a lot of shielding, right? Teachers who are new to, the virtual environment and space, who didn't want other people to see, to be peering at them while they were learning, right? It made them uncomfortable. And so it really compelled us to think about the many different options and opportunities that were out there to take advantage of. I don't know if we would have ever considered a fully virtual school before, right? That was something that, we as educators, we tend to kind of, hold our noses, right? And say, oh, I don't know. And I don't know if that's good quality. But in diving in, we see now that we are becoming experts in virtual learning, we're also better at evaluating our school partners, right? We're better able to look at the educational experiences within our school. And it puts us in a position to really have difficult conversations and engaging them in ways to think about transforming their own practices. The work around dyslexia for us in California is really big. And so really getting our local school district partners to really think about, wow, these are students that we tended to sideline and put into the special education pipeline, and they didn't have as much access to academic coursework. Now we know better. When we know better, we can do better. So this has really presented an opportunity for our district partners, in public schools, to really look at the examples of excellence that are, for instance, our private schools that focus on neurodiversity, right? And seeing the success of their graduates and how they transition into college and then earn college degrees. These are same students that, years ago, we just did not attend to or did not support in the same way. So I feel like it's really pushing us and forcing us to elevating our game in the education arena.
Great, great. Did you find any differences when you partnered with charter schools or private schools versus public schools?
So, you know, school district change, especially in California, because our districts tend to be so ginormous. You know, I live in LA, and LAUSD is my local school. And so it's huge. And so engaging in transformative change is slower in you know, large urban and rural districts. We can create more nimble and flexible models with our charter and private partners in ways that we can't with the larger systems. But a lot of school districts are starting to understand that. And we have, you know, and I'm sure it's probably the same there, but we have charter schools that are actually tied to the district that allows the district to provide examples of excellence, or to be flexible and nimble and to try out new and different things and to experiment, right? And then have that then push into the work in other programs. My daughter in elementary school, she went to a magnet charter school that was a dependent charter in LA Unified School District. So it was unique in that it had 2 teachers, it had 40 kids, they knocked down walls, they had centers. It was very much like what I experienced in Central Park East in New York. And so I feel that our charter, our private, you know, school partners are able to engage in a way that provide models, but I don't think that it's beyond our public school partners' reach to learn from those things and to also reshape the work that they're doing in ways that better support our students. And in the end, you know, John, to be real clear, you know, access is critical, right? There, you know, our public school system is still, you know, the most accessible educational access that we have, in particular for communities of color. And so it's really incumbent upon us not to abandon our public school partners and to really figure out ways in which to help them and support them, but while also too engaging in the work and allowing the flexibility of privates, of charters, of magnets, of virtual schools.
Excellent, excellent. So with that, this is just, I'm thinking about another question as you respond. When you took over as dean, you probably had faculty members who said, we've got strong partnerships, right? We work with this school district, we work with that school district. To open up the mindset around partnering in different ways, what was your approach to that?
So, you know, that's a very interesting question because, you know, in a lot of ways, you don't know what you don't know, right? Mm-hmm. And in engaging in the brainstorming about what are all the things that we can do differently really required, you know, all of us to really go out and look at, you know, really, you know, diverse models. Once we understood that it was, you know, creating safety in our college when I came on board was really important, right? Allowing people to share ideas and knowing that their ideas were valued was, you know, building that trust was something I really had to work on, right? People don't want to put, you know, ideas out there that other people might perceive negatively, right? And especially, you know, our institution is almost 130 years old. And so, you know, we have really strong embedded roots in the local community. You know, there is a history there. There is a foundation there. So how do we also, you know, honor that foundation that was built, but also recognize that we have to do things differently because the demographic of the schools that we work with is changing. The types of schools that we work with are changing. We can't think in the traditional ways that we have been. So again, the strategic planning process that we engaged in was really important in helping to bring along the mindset of those who had been there, who might not have had experiences like Central Park East, who might not have seen non-traditional or, you know, progressive opportunities. And then it gave them an opportunity to dream. In a lot of ways, our Center for Neurodiversity, Learning and Wellness was kind of like our experimental school that was able to do all of these different and new things. And we were able, you know, to bring colleagues in to actually look at what the work was. You know, what is neuroscience? What is neurobiology? And then how does that impact my literacy class? Well, it impacts it in these ways, right? And so being able to have small successes with regards to transformative work was important. And it was important to disseminate that. I do a lot of work around disseminating our wins to the whole college and inviting faculty who have not participated perhaps in the center to come and engage in the work.
Great, thank you. Got a couple of questions over in the chat. One of them speaks to the time and resources necessary to develop these partnerships. How do you convince your administration to give faculty and staff that time, or how do you give faculty and staff that type of time to do the work necessary?
Again, a lot of the work that I do is advocacy, right? And you know, I told you I have a very unique perspective about education and how we are as educators an asset to our overall community. And so really, again, so when I communicate out to our partners, I communicate down to the folks, to the faculty, to the staff that work with us, but I also have to do a lot of work of communicating up and really, you know, advocating for resources to be allocated in particular ways. Understanding, you know, for instance, in my college, we have more clinical faculty than any other college at the university, right? And getting the university to kind of change these paradigms about quality and understanding that clinical faculty are critical with regards to quality. They might not be engaging in scholarship the way that our tenure and tenure track faculty are, but the work that they are engaging with our district partners, having reduced teaching loads, you know, not using them to teach 5 classes a semester, but really allowing them to do the work and engaging in deep and meaningful ways with our partners, that is valued, right? That is value added. And so a lot of the advocacy work that I do in our communities, I also have to do at our institution and getting them to kind of switch those frames. I also use accreditation as a leverage tool. You know, unabashedly, you know, I'm like, you do want us to have accreditation, don't you? It's very important. We are out of business if we don't have accreditation. And so using that to leverage, you know, our budgets every year when we talk about, you know, every year we go and we advocate, we need more money for this. That's important.
Good, thank you, thank you. Talk a little bit about how you market those certificate programs that you have in your school, and how you sustain those. You talked a little about sustainability and revenue generating programs, but talk about that a little bit.
Sure. So it's very interesting. Once you start doing the work, they kind of promote themselves. We really haven't had to do a lot of promotion. And in fact, we don't want to, because we would be inundated, right? We're trying to grow the work slowly. And so we started with going to our school partners and asking, what are some things that are challenges for you? And in what ways can we be a partner in helping you brainstorm or thinking about addressing those challenges? Some of the things that have come up for our school partners were thinking about the school to prison pipeline. They looking at their data and seeing that they were disproportionately, funneling Black and brown bodies into with amorphous labels like SED and ED, and doing some work and thinking about, anti-bias, anti-racist training is not working. What are some other things that we can do to think about this? And really shifting the conversation around trauma and neurodiversity and how the brain works really was kind of our ticket and helping our district partners think about that. So that's how the certificate programs started. We went into the district and we gave a presentation. This is who we are. This is what we do. This is what it looks like. These are what the classes are. It's flexible. It's on the weekends. It's in the evening. These are the costs. We can do a special pricing if the district wants to do it for all, group of teachers. We get the district to buy in and do 10, teachers at a time. And then we throw in 2 more teachers, because their success in our programming, they go back and they talk about it with their friends, and then that grows the program. So really has so far been word of mouth. When you have something that's high quality, that's impactful, that's transformative, other people want to be a part of it. We also collect those stories. We collect the stories of the teachers who say, you know what? I never thought of myself as having bias. I grew up in San Francisco and I love everybody and I don't see color. But over the time in doing this neurodiversity and mindfulness certificate, I realized that I have trauma. I have a high ACE score, so that might impact how I see the world. And then as I'm journaling and I'm looking at my practices, I see that, wow, I used to send Tyrone out of the classroom every single week for sharpening his pencils. So because of the activities we've been doing, I've been observing Tyrone. And Tyrone holds his pencil like this, and it's really hard, and he presses really hard. And I talked to our occupational therapist about it, and guess what? Tyrone needs occupational therapy, and he keeps getting up and going to the pencil sharpener because of his hand-eye coordination, not because he's intentionally being disruptive. So guess what? I don't send Tyrone out of the classroom anymore. And so we collect those stories, and we also enlist folks who have finished our programs to go and talk to new district partners.
Great. Well, thank you for everything, Kimberly. This was an exciting talk, and I'm sure that it added tremendous value to our participants today. I'd like to turn it back over to Carrie to wrap us up and hear from our partners. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Kimberly. That was wonderful. I think you've given us all a lot to think about, and I appreciate you spending your time with us today. March 19th is our next in the series, addressing the teacher shortage. And so hopefully we'll have all of you here for that session. I'd like to thank the sponsor for today. That's EdChoice. If we can go ahead and go on to the next slide there. We've got some resource that we wanted to share with you about how EdChoice could help support some of your work. And I don't know if we have someone from EdChoice that could maybe just briefly talk about the organization, just to make sure that everyone who's here today understands what type of work you do and how they could engage with you.
Carrie, thank you. This is Robert Enlow, and I'm the president and CEO of EdChoice. Thank you so much for Sal and Dr. Cagnell for having University of Indianapolis and what you're doing, and Dr. White-Smith. That was a great presentation. EdChoice's mission is very simple. We want to advance greater educational options as a pathway to successful lives and a stronger society. Our work focuses on three things: research and thought leadership, training and outreach, and investing in states to give families more options. Our focus is obviously on student and family access and options, but we understand clearly that in order to achieve our mission, it requires a much more informed and empowered set of educators. And this is why this conversation is so important to us, because as you've heard, parental educational choice is now a matter of fact of life, right? Every state has magnet schools, open enrollment programs, private schools, and home schools. Almost every state, if not every state now, has virtual schooling and charter schools. 29 states in DC and Puerto Rico have publicly funded programs that allow families either a choice of non-public schools or the ability to customize and personalize their education. We now know with the pandemic, there's an even growing idea of micro-schooling and pod schooling. There's all this time of great change. At the same time, as you were talking about educators, the changing environment for educators. Our polling that we have done shows that half of the teachers in America have considered retiring in the last 3 months. And 6 in 10 are expressing interest in teaching in pods or on tutoring in this modern environment. So there's so much change going on that EdChoice wanted to partner with Sal and with others and with anyone, frankly, so that teachers can have greater voice in this conversation. Too often in the policy debate around educational options, teachers and educators don't have a voice or the conversations around all of the different options. And so our goal here, and we're very happy to be part of this, is just to simply encourage that conversation to be much greater involvement with educators from the policy perspective of choice, and so that we can have greater ownership of the idea of parental educational options across all sectors. So Carrie, thank you for all your work. You, Indy, thank you for everything. And Dr. Smith, thank you very much as well.
Great. Thank you. Everyone, March 19th. We hope to see you there.
Thank you.